Welcome to the School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist, a mental health coach, and a performing arts school principal. And it's these careers and passions combined that have given birth to this podcast. Those working across the creative industries are 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem, and those working in performing and performing arts are twice as likely to suffer with depression and up to 15 times more likely to suffer with anxiety. So as you know, on this podcast, I invite incredible creatives who have lived through a rock bottom but have survived. So this is a podcast of hope and how to get out. And today I'm really excited because I've got the brilliant Sebastian Wocker with me.
Well, thank you. That's quite an intro. That's going to be a tough act to live up to.
And do you know what? This is brilliant because usually with an intro, I have to, email the guest and get it sent to me. But Sebastian has got a book out called The Joy of Addiction. And even Emma Thompson likes it. It says funny, honest, and in your face.
It does, yes.
Wow.
She was most forthcoming when I sent her a copy. I bumped into her in the high street, actually, and she went, "Oh, sorry, I'm in a bit of a hurry. I can't stop." And I was like, "Oh, well, okay, never mind." But so send it to my assistant. So I did. Thought I'd not hear back from her. And then she came back with this glowing reference. I was like, when you're getting a book out, you need all the help you can get, right?
Yeah.
So to have Emma come and give it a good review and say, feel free to put it on the back of your book was, a bit of a result, really.
Brilliant. And kind of by default, she's kind of reviewed the podcast, kind of, maybe. Maybe I just made that up.
I think I just made that up. But, hey, look, artistic license, right?
Artistic license. So a bit of a blurb now about Sebastian, just so you guys know a little bit more. So this isn't in your bio, but we were just chatting over a coffee and actually you got into LAMDA and found it boring after a couple of days.
Well, I was on a lot of drugs at the time and they had taken my life over to the point where anything really great happened to me. I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that.
Right, wow.
But more on that later.
Yeah, a little bit of a backdrop to this bio. So this is about Sebastian. Having found recovery from addiction in 1987, Sebastian Wocker formed indie pop band Yeah, playing the London, Hamburg and Berlin circuits and appearing on various TV and radio shows in Germany and the UK. In 1993, Yeah was awarded the John Lennon Talent Award in Hamburg. In 2002, Wocker signed as a songwriter for Global Chrysalis Publishing and has had various songs released on Cherry Red Records and Universal Music. In 2005, under the artist name Don Sebastiano, love that, he released a solo album, The Spaghetti Tree, and was lead vocalist on the motion picture soundtracks of Pornorama with Moose T and Forget Me Not. Wocker has written as a journalist for The Independent, Mr. Partner magazine in Japan, Camden New Journal, and Ham and High Express. But he is mainly known for his campaigning journalism and quirky satire in the magazine Hampstead Village Voice, of which he has been editor since 2007. Wow. Unconventional interviews with Russell Brand, Martin Bell, Emma Thompson, Giles Corran, David Baddiel, amongst others, have raised a few eyebrows. Basti Wocker is currently lead singer-songwriter of indie band Ridiculous, formed in 2018 with John Moss, who, of course, was in Culture Club. Aaron Baron Cohen, is that Sasha's brother?
Yes, he writes all the music.
And Peter Noon.
Peter Noon?
Noon?
Peter Noon, the bassist.
The bassist.
Very good bassist, yes.
Brilliant. I nearly said that wrong. I don't know why that nearly got me. And this is Sebastian's first book. I've just finished reading it. It's an absolute riot from start to finish. It's absolutely brilliant. I couldn't actually put it down. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you so much. That's lovely. Always lovely to hear.
As I know, you're a fan of the podcast, and so you probably know how I'm going to start. And having read your book, I'd imagine that you've got a few rock bottoms to choose from. I wondered if you could take the listeners and viewers to one of your rock bottoms, and we'll just kind of pan out from there, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I mean, there have been so many. I mean, when I was a teenager, I got into drugs at age 15, and didn't get clean till I was 22. So that was quite a big chunk of my entire teenage life, really. And yeah, my life was completely, for whatever reasons, I got into cannabis was for breakfast. Then I'd go to the pub and get loaded on alcohol, then go home, fall in front of the TV, daytime TV, rolling joints, hanging out with friends. We'd all bunk off school. It was the punk era. So everyone was kind of bunking off was what you did, right? So I didn't go to Hampstead Comprehensive very often. I did, of course, go there and get into trouble and stuff. But in the end, it took me over. And it was quite a chaotic time. There was a lot of stuff going on. Skinheads and things were chasing you down the street. I mean, I got beaten up by skinheads in the high street once, like broad daylight. There was a lot of bullying. There was a lot of stuff. And I'm going into the reasons a little bit why maybe I took to drugs as a kind of form of comfort. And somewhere I also hung out with these kids that were older than me, that were punk rockers. They were all a year older than me at school, which at school, that's a long time when you're a kid, right? And I felt safe around them because although they were pretty nuts and they took lots of drugs, they took me in and they didn't beat me up, right, basically. So it was like, well, that's okay, well, I'll hang out with them then, right? And it got to a point where I was just doing so many drugs, and a lot of people experiment with it, obviously, but I took to it, and it later became clear to me that I am an addict. I have an addictive personality. I'm someone who can't just have one or experiment, because if I do one, I will end up doing more and more and more. And anyone else who's an addict will know that, that it's not something I can negotiate with or manage, my use of any form of mood altering chemicals, including alcohol. I even have a problem with coffee and certainly sugar.
Right.
So moving towards the rock bottoms, well, there were a few. I mean, there was one time, for example, really should have been a rock bottom, but wasn't. When I ended up doing Tipex thinner, right? There's solvent, I was even doing solvent abuse at some point. And I nearly jumped out of a window of a friend's house. And her mum was a psychologist and actually pulled me back out from jumping out of the window and sat me down with a brandy, which felt like the right thing to do at the time, because I was a nervous wreck. I'd done all this acid, I'd done all this speed, and then I was taking Tipex, and I literally was a dustbin for drugs, right? It was almost as though I had to prove to everyone else I could do more than them, right? It was that silly teenage thing of I can show you how tough I am and I can handle it, But anyway, for whatever reasons, and that was a point that ought to have been a rock bottom, but these things, they happen, and they don't. As an addict, you think, well, okay, that was bad, I'm going to stop now. And you try and stop for a day or two. And then the arrogance comes back in and says, well, it wasn't that bad. You can, you can have, let's just go to the pub for a few pints, right?
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as I go to the pub for a few pints, if after 3 pints someone says, fancy a tickle or a this or a that of some other form of drug, I'm unable to say no. As an addict. An addict, my off switch for taking drugs was faulty. It just didn't work, right? Most people, they go, oh, I've reached the point now. I better stop. I didn't have that. So moving on to the rock bottom. So I managed to get on into a musical, Hair, the musical, the 60s rock musical, age 17. And I auditioned purely by chance and got the part. It was a lead role as well, not the lead role, but a principal part, which was like, for me, was like, wow, this is amazing. And they were paying me like 1,400 Deutschmarks, it was then, a week, and I was staying in big hotels, and it should have been the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And yet, when I got there, every night after rehearsal, and then after every performance, I'd go home to my hotel room and like literally hide under the duvet. And the rest of the cast were out gallivanting. They're all 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, right? In Hair the musical, basically going and celebrating, right? And I felt so small. My self-worth, I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought I couldn't do it. I'm not really an actor. I'm faking this. Meanwhile, the director and everyone saying, you're doing a great job, Sebastian. We love what you're doing. But I just didn't feel it. And I just got into this really low place. And after about 6 weeks of touring all these theatres in Germany, I just said, look, I've got to go home. I'm having a breakdown. I was having a kind of a complete bottom because I didn't have that cushion of drugs and alcohol that I normally had.
Right.
My routine of just bumming out, doing nothing and taking drugs and getting high had stopped in a very stark way. And suddenly I was in this pretty disciplined theatre production, right?
Yeah,
Where you've got to wake up in the morning and work, right? Certainly for rehearsals, and then and then you're standing there. And the first 2 weeks we played in Munich at the Deutsches Theater, which is like the most critical audience in Germany. And there I was like, oh my God, it was like the pressure was on, right? It's like you've got to be just really good.
And you were probably in amongst, in the midst, of a detox.
I was basically detoxing on. I mean, I don't recommend. Actually, it mentions it in the book. I don't recommend standing in front of 3,000 of den deutschen Volk performing and singing and acting as a form of getting off drugs. It's not a good way of doing it. The pressure's really on. You do not want to be doing that. It's suddenly the lights are on you. You're on stage, and you've got it was really hard work. And anyway, so I went back to London, and it was so depressing because I got to London, then I felt even more depressed. First thing I did was score some ganja, sit in front of the daytime TV and get high again, right? And I felt safe with my cup of tea and my joint and the TV, and just in that little world, that small world of the addict, isolating, right? And I promised myself I'd stay off the hard drugs, but I needed that, getting stoned and basically as close to oblivion as I could. And that was really depressing. And then I got back to the tour, and I sat down with the director, and he said, look, we're so glad to have you back. You're great at your part. You're really good. I didn't believe him. The understudy, the guy who was playing me, who was also a friend, I remember arriving back and seeing him and thinking, God, he's so much better than me. There is no way they're going to want me to stay on this tour. I just had such low self-worth from all these years of doing drugs and So I hit a real rock bottom. Then I got back to London. In the end, I threw in the towel after about a couple of months. And I just said, look, that's enough. I went back to London, and I had loads of money that I'd saved from this tour, right? So I thought, what could cheer me up? What's the one possible thing that could help me feel better, because I just felt so depressed and low. And I thought, if I go to New York, because I'd been to New York before, and that was such a buzzing city, and it was even more nuts than I was, so no one had noticed how nuts I was, right? So I went to New York. I just flew to New York, and that trip lasted 2 days, and I literally hurtled into the abyss. As soon as I touched down New York, I go to this liquor store. The guy who I knew who ran the liquor store sold me some cocaine. We went and got, I will swear, fucked up on cocaine, and there were all sorts happened. And in the end, I got to this point where I was literally shaking, and I was walking up and down 7th Avenue with a bottle of orange juice, clinging onto it. The next day, having not slept, totally jet lagged, totally dehydrated, been drinking and doing cocaine the whole night. And I was literally I was walking down the street, and I smelt because I hadn't changed my clothes. And I was walking down the street, and I was one of those people who you see walking down the street and go, oh, that's not good, And in the end, I had to kind of like sort of phone home for help to get a flight back. I just messed it all up. And I got home, and I lay there on my futon back in London, like a sort of dead stick insect, thinking, I just want to die. And I actually thought, we had quite a tall house. There was sort of 4 flights. It's one of those thin Georgian tall affairs, right? I thought, right, okay, I'm going to walk to the top and jump off, and just we've got York Stone at the bottom. I'll die pretty instantly, I was then sort of plotting my suicide, basically. And the only thing, I played the tape forwards, and I saw my mum come out in the garden finding me in my tape, right? And I thought I couldn't do that to her. Right. She'd been through enough, God knows. And I loved her. I did love my mum very, very much. And we were very close. And I could not do that to her. So one little semblance of kind of, that aside, I was a bit of a coward. And the thought of dying, even though there would only be 1 second of pain, there would be pain. And do addicts not like pain, right? So that might have saved me, just the fact that I was a bit of a coward, that I was too scared to actually commit suicide, But it was a real low. It was as low as I think I've felt until then. Later, there were a few more lows until I got the best low of all was that last one. Again, I was lying in the same room, only on a bed this time, a few years later, having gone out all night and got absolutely wellied again, right? After, as the book describes, years of carnage, some of which is quite amusing. It makes for a good tragicomedy, right? It's With Nail and I meets Christiana F, right? But there are funny moments as well. But of course, it's a bit of a tragedy, really. And I'm lying there again, shaking, and they just invented the drug ecstasy, and we'd all tried it out. But of course, at the time, we didn't know that you weren't meant to mix it with other drugs. Which, of course, being a cocktail of drugs myself, I just as soon as it entered my system, I ended up shaking again, feeling really weak. I was like, oh my God, this is not good, And I had to go home and I lay there under the duvet. And I was absolutely petrified. My heart was beating like fuck. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. And my mum had been going to 12-step fellowships for parents and family of addicts and alcoholics. And so she'd been working the 12 steps. And she'd had all the literature and had been leaving it around, but had been trying not to lecture me and stuff because that doesn't work with an addict. Kind of less is more. That it's such a thin thing. How do you get someone to go to meetings, right? And I had been to one meeting before, but I turned up there and thought, oh, who are these people? I don't want all this. Oh, God, it's got the word God on the wall. Forget it. This isn't for me, right? And then I'd walked out, and that's basically that had been my only effort to try and really get clean. And at this point then, I was lying there shivering in bed, and something happened. Just that point, I thought, I can't do it anymore. A cloud moved and the sun shone on my face, and I said to myself, I'm going to go to a meeting tonight, but I really meant it. And I went, please, God, please let me get to a meeting. Now, I was a complete atheist at the time. I did not believe in God. I still, I don't believe in any set religions or anything, but I do have some kind of benevolent higher power that whether it exists or not, I don't know, but it works for me. Yeah, it worked for me then, right? Yeah, sure. So I'm a bit agnostic, really. But that said, I do believe in some kind of higher power. And at that point, when the sun shone on my face, and I said, I'm going to the meeting. So I went to sleep. I instantly felt some comfort. I instantly felt unafraid. So whatever this higher power was had suddenly kind of taken me in its hands, right? And I suddenly felt, whoa, maybe it will be all right for the first time ever. And I went to that meeting and kept going. And I can't say I was clean from that moment on. I kind of relapsed a bit, but I kept going to meetings. And that's what they said, no matter what, just keep going to the meetings, And eventually the message filtered through, And after 2 or 3 little mini relapses, I got it. I finally got it, right? And it was amazing. Like, wow, yeah. And I got clean, and not just clean, but through the 12 steps and through the camaraderie and the fellowship there, started to enjoy life without drugs. Because it's one thing to stop doing drugs and just sit there white knuckling it going, I'm clean, I'm clean, I'm clean, but I don't really enjoy this, to actually embracing life on life's terms and saying, yes, this is good.
Yeah. Sebastian, thanks so much for sharing all of that. I mean, you've really taken us on a very detailed journey there, which I really, really appreciate. And I think I'm right in saying you've been living in the solution, if you like, to use a phrase, I think, in your book for quite a number of years now. I think that kind of period that you were describing, am I right in saying was sort of like 15 to sort of 21 years old?
Yeah.
It's interesting working in the rehab as well, because sometimes you'll get someone in who gets into recovery at 85. I think the oldest person that I've worked with has been 89. And this lady started drinking when her husband passed away. Wow. Certainly reading your book and talking to you now, it sounds like you were off to the races very, very young. It was very acute, very full on, very quickly. I mean, I'm actually going to use one of the quotes from your book here. You call yourself a cannabis, acid, alcohol, mushroom, cocaine casualty early on. So it sounds like it was sort of all in very early.
Yeah. Well, it was actually, I hate to use the word fashionable, but it was very fashionable amongst the teenagers of my generation to walk into a room and go, got any drugs? That was the modus operandi. How many drugs? It was the punk era. That whole punk thing, and actually, in other walks of fashion as well, but punk and taking drugs, there seemed to be there was a kind of a cult thing happening, right? Because there was the punk thing, but there was also this whole reggae thing happening, and people were really getting into dub and reggae music, right? I mean, these are, little white middle class Hampstead kids, but we all got into that, and we really enjoyed it. And of course, it explores it in the book as well. It says really it was sort of an excuse just to take drugs, right? There was this one kid, right, who still today is like, he sort of considers himself a white Rasta. And I mean, he went to Studio One concerts and he'd get beaten up because he wasn't accepted and stuff. But he swore by the Cully weed, right? It was like a god to him, right? And all this talking about Haile Selassie and all getting into Rastafarianism and stuff like that, which frankly was probably nothing to do with our culture at all, but it was something that people felt good about doing as well, because you had all these skinheads and Nazis. So by kind of joining in with the anti-Nazi league and getting into, it was kind of a statement, when you're 14, 15, 16, you want to say, I'm not a fucking Nazi, I'm not a racist, I'm not like that, right? And you want to kind of, it was a part of like justifying all this stuff going on.
So would you say, sorry to interrupt, would you say it was mainly environmental? Would you look at it mainly as an environmental
As
thing?
to why I became an addict?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very good question. Whether addiction is something that happens around you, and whether it's a result of, for example, being bullied at school, being beaten up by skinheads, teachers picking on you. Bullying was a big thing in my life as a kid, and also being the son of two Germans growing up in 1970s Britain in the school playground environment where everyone was watching The Great Escape, Colditz, Dad's Army. It was war all the time, right?
Wow, yeah.
On TV. And this country was almost, as far as TV and film was concerned, it did wallow in a certain victory mentality of like, we've done it, 2 world wars and a World Cup, right? So that was going on. And then being German was definitely not a good playground accessory, right? Right. So I very quickly learned to stuff that and like not be German at all. So I've forgotten the question again now. So
yeah, I was just curious about how much your environment played a part in this. I think the reason I'm so curious about this question is I'm sort of imagining maybe a 15, 16, 17-year-old listening to this who's maybe taking lots of different substances and is really confused, like, why am I doing this? Why am I so heavily into this lifestyle? Or maybe even a parent who's got, say, a 15-year-old son or daughter who's doing those things and just feels lost and is trying to think, okay, well, why is this happening? Now, I know that's a huge question. Why is this happening?
Well, actually, I think there's a very good answer to it, which is, peer pressure is huge.
Right.
And it's peer pressure that got me into doing drugs, I think. All that hanging around the back of the science block, smoking cigarettes first. Your friends are smoking cigarettes and you're like, well, I better to fit in. You want to fit in with your peer group. And if they're all smoking weed, you want to fit in with them. If they're all doing coke, you want to fit in with them. So no one wants to be left out at that age.
And I think I'm right in saying that you actually call the gateway drug in the book anyway, cigarettes.
Well, cigarettes, actually, television and sweets when I was 4 years old. Right. That stuffing myself with something, that switching off and just watching TV, and stuffing myself with Mars bars and curly whirlies, whatever I could get my hands on, right? That sugar fix, that was definitely a big thing. And then cigarettes, I remember the first time I had a cigarette, the taste was horrible, but all my friends were watching me. So I'd be like, I'm a man, I can do this, right? So, and the same with then weed, and then the same with all the other things that it progressed into, addiction. But then the same thing that got me using got me clean, because the peer pressure within the fellowships of 12-step programs, when you go to them, you're sitting around in a room full of people who don't do drugs and think it's really uncool. And you're suddenly thinking, everything you thought was really cool before is turned on its head. And suddenly it's like, well, no, actually, you know what? Taking drugs is really uncool. It's not going to help anything. It's like the most stupid thing I can do. I'm just polluting my body, my mind, and my spirit with something that's just going to make me weaker. It's going to take away my character and personality. It's going to, it's not going to help me get a job, is it? It's not going to help me create things. I mean, there's this fallacy that, smoking pot makes you write great songs or something like that. That might have worked in the 60s for 10 minutes, but the reality is it doesn't, right?
Thank you, Sebastian. And I think as well, there's sort of been a bit of a cultural shift of late. There was a NHS survey. I'm not quite sure how they got all the stats, but basically saying that 1 in 3 people under 30 don't use drugs or alcohol at all. Now, obviously, some of those people will be in recovery, but the vast majority probably aren't. And it's good to see that there seems to be a bit of a shift away from maybe the culture that you grew up in when you were 15.
Yeah. Well, yes, but actually 1 in 3 is still quite not very many people. I mean, it's, if you think about it, that means 2 in 3 are using drugs of some sort or another.
Yeah.
I mean, Britain's always had a very alcoholic society, in the sense that I'm not saying they're all alcoholics, but going to the pub, there's been a drinking culture in this country for years and years and years, right? That does seem to be shifting into a sort of caffeine culture now on the high street. I mean, it's pubs closing and Starbucks and Nero and whatever opening. So I don't know whether that's an improvement. We're all just now nervous wrecks instead of slightly drunk people. But as far as young people's concerned, when I was that age, I wanted to go to the pub before I was allowed to go to the pub. I wanted to do drugs because, well, I wasn't allowed to do it. So you're going to be more rebellious at that age. You want to do things you're not meant to do. And if authority tells you don't do it, you go the other way. And in the current climate, with the current government we have, quite similar to the one when I was a kid, because it was Thatcherism then, right? So, and now you've got this sort of neocon modern version of the Conservative Party, which, combined with Brexit, combined with cost of living crisis, combined with post-COVID, I mean, it's kind of a cocktail of a perfect storm, right? Of things that if you're growing up, and also kids these days don't have as much in the sense of, and one thing I forgot, of course, mobile phones and the internet. That didn't exist when I was a kid, right? Yeah. We kind of made our own entertainment, but I think there's a lot of, and that's why there are so many mental health issues now, because there's a lot going on for a young mind to deal with as a teenager growing up. You could, I don't want to say you could forgive someone for turning to drugs and alcohol, but, and also the peer pressure again as well. Peer pressure is a very, very strong factor in all this. And
I'm sorry to interject. I think cocaine in particular, which is something that you talk a lot about in the book, amongst other substances as well, has almost become normalized as well, isn't it? Maybe since the 80s, it's particularly sort of an entertainment and in business and other work cultures.
It had a sort of glamorous image in that wealthy people took it. You went to nightclubs, and then you did cocaine, and at parties at posh people's house. It's an expensive drug, and it's a sort of seen as a rich people's drug. So people will think, well, if I'm doing it, there's this illusion of I'm successful and I'm with all the beautiful people and la la la, right? Which is a complete fad.
And it's a wicked drug, really, because it spikes your dopamine quite high, well, very high. But it's so short-lived. I think it's 15 minutes, and then it starts to go down. And actually,
that's it. So you're doing it again and again and again, and it is also quite subtle. In the same sentence, I'll say it's a subtle drug in that you take it, and it's not. You don't, you don't go like heroin. You just flop out. If you get stoned, is also quite a subtle drug. I mean, acid can be quite obvious because you take it, and then you're seeing things, right? It's like you're in a different world. And but cocaine, you can still be in a sort of nightclub environment. You're still socially acceptable. Yeah, you're talking shit at people, and they're talking shit back at you, and you're becoming an arrogant fuckwit. But that aside, you think you're enjoying yourself the whole time, and you're having a good time. So it does make you feel good, the dopamine, as you say, you're getting that hit, but then it goes away quickly, and then you need more. So it's also then economically, very quickly people can get very broke on it. It's like gambling in that sense. It can destroy your economic world if you're doing it on a daily basis. And as was the case with me when I hit my rock bottom, and I have friends, they died of heart attacks doing cocaine, age 18, age 25, age 35. I've got a friend who recently just stopped, thank God, because he had a fright, right? And he's now stopped. But it can kill you, that drug, just from 1 minute to the next. That time when I hit that rock bottom, my heart was going like that. And that was cocaine,
Just going back to the drugs you were using as a teenager, before we sort of get into, what you did next and all the brilliant things that have happened since then. It seems like you were sort of pushing lots of different levers, because like you just admitted there, taking a psychedelic like acid would give you one experience, cocaine would give you another, weed would give you another one, alcohol another one. It seems to me like you just wanted to escape. Would that be right in saying? Because it seems like you were just sort of anything that would sort of take you out of self seemed appealing. Would that be your right?
Yes, definitely. I mean,
yeah,
it's no coincidence that I also, one of the things I love to do is travel. And when I was a teenager, I'd be doing all these drugs. I was on Interrails a lot. If ever I could get hold of an Interrail ticket, I'd be on it. That thing of escape. The addict is here but doesn't want to be here. They want to be there. And when they're there, they want to be somewhere else. I mean, yes, there is a part of, I think I can speak for a lot of addicts, saying they're restless, irritable and discontent with what they have and they want to be somewhere else. They think that if they do something, they'll feel better.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whether that's getting on a train or a plane, which I still have today. But listen, traveling's a healthier high than doing drugs. Okay, so you can go and do that, and also it's a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing to travel, Whereas doing drugs is very, very rarely a beautiful thing. It was a lot of fun at the beginning, right? And there were times. I'm not going to say it was all hell, because there were times where it was a lot of fun. But where it took me at the end, and you mentioned cocaine, that drug. For all it's at the beginning, you think, oh, doing coke, I'm so cool, I'm up there, oh, this is great, The down from it the next day, or the 2 or 3 days afterwards, and if I'd go on a 3-day bender, which would happen, I'd be out for a week feeling ill, like death warmed up, actually feeling it. Not dissimilar to that. I had COVID once, and it's like, there's that feeling. It's like, oh God, I can't do this, I'm going to die. This is horrible. Right.
There's one bit in the book that I found really engaging, a little bit scary and a little bit funny, lots of things, where you're talking about the walk of shame. Now, obviously, most people who are listening or watching this right now will be aware of what that term is in a kind of colloquial, general sense, the walk of shame. Yeah. But you actually rebranded it Walk of the Vampires, I think.
Yes, I was in New York in that particular chapter of the book. And I'd hit such a bottom on having done cocaine for 2 or 3 days. And actually it was one night. And then the next day I felt so low. And I ended up walking up and down 7th Avenue, clutching this bottle of orange juice for dear life. And I literally walked the entire length of 7th Avenue. Now, anyone who's been to 7th Avenue will know that is a very long avenue. I walked all the way up and I walked all the way down again. And I felt like death warmed up. And I mentioned in the book that it's a bit like being a vampire, in that when daylight hits you and the normals are walking around you with their children going, Daddy, haven't they? You're like, oh, God. You feel like you just want to curl up in a little ball and hang upside down like a vampire bat and die, right? You want to be in the dark. You want to be, you do not want to be out in the sunshine, right? So it is actually a strange thing, but like being a drug addict and not taking drugs or taking drugs, there is something vampirical about it. You do enter the dark side. You cross over. There were times where, for example, I was in Spain and I'd enter this kind of nightlife that never ended. There's a whole world going on now somewhere in London. Probably it could be in a cellar around the corner. People sitting around on mattresses, getting fucked up, thinking the rest of the world, this is what the world does, man. We're all like this. Oh, it's all so fucked up. Just saying that literally for 4 days, sitting on a mattress next to someone.
So you always had FOMO. You always felt that there was a party going on somewhere.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But I mean, the thing is that I was.
Or the party's at your house, by the sounds of things.
Well, the funny thing about when you do drugs, you think that's what everyone does. Right. You don't realise. It's like people who drink. It's funny, since I haven't had a drink now for nearly 15 years, and I quite often meet people who say, "What? You haven't had a drink 15 years?" And to them, it's like, well, everyone drinks. Obviously, everyone has a drink. Everyone has a glass of wine. And guess what? I don't know what the percentage of the world is. I mean, obviously, if you take like the whole Muslim world and certain religions, they don't drink at all, right? But the population of the world that just does not touch alcohol is huge.
Yeah.
And as sort of North Europeans, we all think, well, everyone drinks, right? Or Europeans, and funnily enough, once you stop it, you realise, oh, hang on a minute, there's a whole world without this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like when you go to meetings, I go to meetings now, 12-step meetings regularly, and they are still, without doubt, the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's 1 hour of my day, and I sit there and I listen and I share and I walk out feeling centred. Now, other people, they get all stressed up all day and they run around London, work, relationships, all the problems of life, are on them. They go and they have a couple of pints and everything feels all right for a bit, right? But they're not addicts or alcoholics. They can do that. I can't do that. And now I'm kind of glad I don't have to, right? I don't need to put something in my body for me to feel better.
Absolutely.
And I can sit there with other people and share. And I mean, in a way, what we're doing now isn't that dissimilar, discussing this stuff, airing it, getting it out, and helping each other, be in a good place. And so there is a world without alcohol, without drugs, without any of that stuff.
Absolutely. And that has been your world, I think, longer than the world when you were in the madness, if you like to call it.
I've done the maths. Let's do the maths quickly now. Age 15 to 22, using.
Right.
22 to 29, clean and sober.
Right, 7 years.
Thought I could have a glass of wine, age 30, had one. Slowly entered The Joy of Relapse, which will be the sequel at a bookshop near you, coming sometime soon. I have to write it first, but it's there. Unfortunately, I relapsed, and I went back into the abyss again, very slowly this time. It wasn't as drastic as the first time. And to the rest of the world, I looked all right.
Yeah.
But then I went down and down and down. By my 40th birthday, I was ending up messing my life up again. Everything went wrong.
Right.
And then I'm 58 now. Here's some real maths for you. I'm 58 now and I'm 15 years clean. So when did I stop?
I think you said 7 before, and then 7 plus, what was it? 17?
Whatever's from
24.
29 to, oh God, anyway, it doesn't matter.
But the balance is definitely you've been living in the joy of recovery rather than the joy of addiction.
If you include my childhood before I took the first drug, definitely.
Exactly. Which actually is a really good segue into why it's called the joy of addiction. And, I'll take a bit out of your book here. You say the main symptom of addiction is to convince the suffering addict that they don't have it. And finding out that I was an addict was the best thing that has ever happened to me.
Yeah. And so it's called The Joy of Addiction because it's kind of an ironic title, obviously. I mean, there was the book, The Joy of Sex was the famous book in the 60s, which was the joy of. And then there's been there's a book called The Joy of Recovery somewhere, I think.
Right, okay.
But that would have been too obvious. For me, for my complicated addict mind. And The Joy of Addiction is sort of quirky and funny in a way, and it's meant to confessions of a teenage wastrel, right? And the joy is knowing I'm an addict, and I can be an addict. It's all right. I'm still an addict. I'm 100% an addict, but I'm still an alcoholic, but I don't drink and I don't take drugs.
Yeah.
So I'm a recovering alcoholic, as opposed to a suffering alcoholic. And that's a thing that in the past never existed. In the 70s and 80s, we brought someone's an addict, they're an addict. Right. They'll never come back. That's it. Yeah, alcoholic, oh dear, look at them, lying on a park bench. That was the kind of, stereotype of an addict and an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Now, I think we can pretty much safely say an addict is someone who just can't take those things. If they do, then yes, they become those things. But now I've become clean and sober. And maintaining some kind of program. I have to maintain some kind of program. And it's not very difficult once you're going. It's like going to the gym, you get stronger. And once your muscles are strong enough, it's not a big deal picking up the weights, right? Talking of which, I must go to the gym because, as you can see, I need some
me
work
too as well. I need to work.
But it's like, and the joy is that knowing I'm an addict, waving the white flag of surrender, saying, I can't do this anymore, letting go.
Yeah.
And then allowing that positive life of recovery in. It's the best thing I've ever done. And I get highs all the time now. Natural little highs. Just good things happen. I'm feeling it now.
I can feel it across the table. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so you get that good feeling, and that's all you want, right? That's all anyone wants, is to feel good if they can. We've got to accept we can't feel good all the time. Yeah. And a lot of the time, especially when I'm walking around London and stuff, and you look at all the faces and everyone's a bit miserable, and it's like, it brings you down. It's quite hard work. Life is hard work sometimes. Yeah.
And all those things that I read at the beginning in the intro, all those brilliant things you've done, all the bands you've been in, the current band that you're in, all the writing that you've done, and the Village Voice and all of that, that's all happened in recovery, hasn't it?
Well, funnily enough, the Village Voice started, I was at the end of my using, and I was still socially drinking, right? And I started the magazine. The first thing I thought to myself was, God, all the pubs are closing. Isn't it terrible? And then what I basically was thinking about, isn't it terrible, all the things that are going wrong, and the refuse infrastructure's a mess, and this, that, and the other. And I thought, I could write a book about this. And I thought, a book's a bit much, but I could do a magazine. I thought, a magazine, that'd be fun. Because I was unemployed at the time. I didn't know what I was doing, like work-wise, and spending much too much time in pubs. And at the launch of The Voice, I got the whole of Hampstead there, and everyone was there, and they were giving away free cocktails at this bar as part. I said, look, I'll get everyone into your bar.
That's probably what,
bar,
right.
And if you give everyone a drink on the house, and they did these cocktails. I drank it. It was like, God, I don't know what they put in it. But when I had to do my introduction speech for the magazine, and everyone was there, and suddenly I went, whoa, bloody hell. I started going, oh, shit, this cocktail's hit me. You know, I'd had 2 of them, and I was like, oh. And I was drunk. I was standing there, you know. So, and then I hit a rock bottom about half a year later, which will be revealed in the next book. But and then got back into recovery, but that was so difficult.
I think the key thing is that every time you got into recovery, your creativity actually then took over, and you were able to achieve things. I mean, it's like that when you got into hair, wasn't it? Ultimately, because you were still drinking and using, it kind of meant that you had to like come out of hair.
Well, what I'd say is that when I'm not using, I'm clean and sober, the quality of the work I do is of a different level.
Yeah.
So you can still work and be a functioning alcoholic or functioning addict, right? You turn up for work and then you have your bender and then you disappear and you recover, but you go back to work, right? That doesn't last long, but some people get away with that for a period of time. Right? Ultimately, it caught up with me. I can only talk for myself. There are a million other ways of doing it, but the quality of my work is definitely better. And I'm much more. The principles of being open-minded, honest, and willing are things that I've picked up in the 12-step fellowships, right? And all these tools that I've got from working the steps and from being with other addicts. And sometimes it's just having a coffee and shooting the breeze, and someone will say something and a penny drops, and you go, that's a good one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that clarity that you have. And I mentioned like that being, if I included my clean time as a child, when I got clean, suddenly there's that clarity you have that when you're a child, you go, oh, wow, that lucidness that you only have as a child, really, because your mind isn't polluted with stuff yet, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a beautiful thing to be clean, because you suddenly get that kind of, for want of a better word, enlightenment, really, which I don't know if you've read Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I
have. It's a brilliant book, and you quote it a couple of times, don't you, in yours? It's a brilliant book.
He mentions that enlightenment sounds like, some grandiose thing. It's not. Enlightenment is just that normal state of being, that natural state of being that we are when we're a child or an animal has, right? That we're just like, we're uncorrupted.
Yeah, Sebastian, I'm just conscious of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I just want to thank you for just letting it all hang out. It's one thing that I just adored about the book as well, is your level of honesty. Honestly, it's unprecedented. You just put it all out there to help other people and really get your story across. Just because we're nearly out of time, I appreciate this is going to be quite a difficult question. If there's someone listening to this who has got a 15-year-old child living the life that you were living at that age, or a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, what advice would you give them on how to handle that situation? Because I would imagine you'd be better placed than most people to have that insight.
Actually, I could really thank my mum for when I was going through it. And of course, at first, you want to engage with your child, and you want to help them, and you want to stop them. And this thing's got hold of them, and they just, for whatever reason, they're not letting go. And so there was a sea change when my mum, I was still living at home, and I was probably 19, 20 at the time. And my mum started attending Families Anonymous, which is the same as it's called, I think, Al-Anon or Teen-Anon.
Yeah.
There are various fellowships for...
I think it's Alateen, I think it's called.
Alateen.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
There are more than one, but there are fellowships for, if you look up 12-step fellowship for family of, it will come up, right?
Yeah.
So, and then she started attending that, and something changed. There was a sort of invisible change. She started working a program herself, and she started letting go of trying to change me. And just rather than, try and fix me, she let go and she worked on herself. Now, something changed then, and there was a dynamic, and I don't know what it was, but I still needed to hit that point where I was scared. I think any addict who's really an addict, unless they're scared and they think, oh shit, I'm going to die, or this is really, really bad, they'll probably carry on using. And that I know I did until I got to that point. Oh God, please help me! I'm going to die, right? But because my mum was in that place and she'd been leaving literature around, she'd already got me to go to one meeting, because I knew it was there, and I knew I didn't know whether it worked or not, but basically it was my last hope really at that point. But because she was in a good place, something shifted, something invisible. I don't know what it is, but a feeling. So I would suggest to anyone, if your child or your husband or your partner or your sister or your brother or someone you love is suffering from addiction, do embark on one of those 12-step programs. It's an hour of your day, if that, or you can go a couple of times a week or whatever, and you will get into a good place where you'll be then best placed to help them if and when they're ready.
That's an absolutely brilliant insight there. And you know, as always, we'll put all of these links into the show notes. I'll have a chat with Sebastian at the end about, you know, what links we can put in to help people, but definitely Alateen, Al-Anon, and there'll be some other things that we might add there as well. Obviously, a link to where we can purchase your book as well, of course, and everywhere else, maybe links where to follow Sebastian online and things like that. Unfortunately, we are out of time, Sebastian.
Sure.
But I just really want to thank you. It's been a brilliant hour. It's absolutely shot past. And your honesty is just so inspiring. It's going to help so many people.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's absolutely brilliant. I've got a fellow gooner in the house.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we've got the... We're both suffering Arsenal addicts.
Yeah, that is very, very true. That's why I've gone for the Prince mug today. But yeah, Sebastian, thanks again, mate. And thanks to everyone who's listening and watching. And of course, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. See you soon. Look after yourself. Thank you.